Support for TC Jufo comes from The Ordway, presenting Fiddler on the Roof. This beloved theatrical masterpiece introduces a new generation to the powerful, heartwarming story of fathers and daughters and husbands and wives. Running from November 30th through December 12th in downtown St. Paul, tickets are available at ordway.org, and when you use our exclusive discount code TCJ at checkout between now and November 30th, you'll get 15% off your order, up to 4 tickets per account. That discount is available on tickets the first week of the run, November 30th through December 3rd and December 5th in the evening. And TC Jufolk is supported by Englander Dental and Dr. Manuel Englander. Located at 3801 West 50th Street in Edina, Dr. Englander and his caring professional dental team provide full-service dental care and transform smiles. Englander Dental specializes in everything from routine cleanings and teeth whitening to root canals, implants, and tooth replacement. For more information, go to englanderdental.com. Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jufolk. This week I talk with Max Yeshaye Brumberg-Kraus, the first associate producing artistic director at Six Points Theater. We talk about what brought him to this new position, how he got his start in the theater, and how the theater is a Jewish art form on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Max Yeshaye Brumberg-Kraus, welcome to the Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
I'm glad to be here.
So you have a relatively new position here in the Twin Cities Jewish community. You are the new associate producing artistic director at Six Points Theater, formerly known as the Minnesota Jewish Theater Company. So I guess for starters, congratulations on this opportunity. And second of all, tell us a little bit more about the opportunity and how it found you, you found it. How did that all come together?
Yeah, I think it was pretty fortuitous. I had been, working on my career as I'm an independent artist and performer, writer in the Twin Cities, and I've been here since 2016. And I've been working on building a name for myself, working on making connections throughout the cities. And then, of course, COVID-19 happened. And after I was making some of these really good kind of connections with Ramon, with the Guthrie, with some of these places, everything shut down. And it was just this kind of hibernating period of being like, my career was going in this one direction. And I was like, but then I was contracted by a friend to do a show, an outdoor show in the Bay Area, which was doable because there was nothing else going on that I could do. And it just so happened that there was this big project and it helped me clear my own schedule, my own life. And then when I got back from it, there was this opening at Six Points Theater, and I'm Jewish, and a lot of my work is informed by religious questions, by spiritual questions, by community, by history, all these sort of things, and I would say deeply engaging Jewish themes. And so to see this opportunity open up at this kind of great moment where I had space and time and need all at the same time for a community to do theater work in, it was great timing. It was perfect for me. The kind of work is a little new to me. It's more on the sort of producing and administrative side. I'm very I describe myself as an artist. I'm very much in that sort of like creative space thing.
Sure.
It's new to be, in some ways, to be more supporting artists and bringing people together, helping out with the rehearsal from the sort of producing side. Not that there isn't creativity there too. I mean, I'm basically helping Barbara, who's been doing this for 30 years, more basically, I'm basically helping her do what she's been doing alone for the last.
Right, for the entirety of what was called Minnesota Jewish Theater Company, it has been Barbara Brooks on
Exactly,
her own.
exactly, and I can't imagine what that
Wait,
would be like.
oh, it seems totally insane to put on the quality of shows that season in, season out, she's been putting together by
And,
herself.
and it's the quality of shows, the care for the performers, the care for the community, this like
Yeah.
personal touch, this like it's so personal and so uh thoughtful about what community means and what the role of the theater is in the Jewish community here. I mean, that's so much work, and so I'm glad to help her as having gone to the shows, having experienced the theater before working with them. I'm like, wow, that's pretty remarkable that she's been doing this uh, for so long, and she really needed an associate. I mean,
Yeah, for sure. Is that something that sort of surprised you? I'm not sure if that's even the right way to phrase it, but let's go with it for a sec. Just sort of how much the Jewish community cares, not just about theater in general, but about independent Jewish theater like Six Points.
I think it makes sense to me because there aren't a ton of independent Jewish theaters in the country.
No, there's not.
And so I think it's a real treasure. I think people locally and nationally recognize the need for something like that. I mean, outside of New York, there's very little. That's
Yeah.
just the landscape, in the U.S. at least. And to have, but it kind of makes sense here in the Twin Cities where there are so many wonderful independent theaters and so many specific theaters for communities. There's, indigenous theater companies, there's black theater
Hmm.
companies, there's, Latinx theater companies, there's queer and trans theater companies. There's a real strong sense of independent theaters that are serving particular communities as well as not just those internal communities.
Right.
So it makes sense to me that the Jewish theater would actually find that space here.
So, what was it that brought you into theater? To start with, obviously, it is a career choice you've made, but what was it that sort of brought you to that place?
Yeah, that's a great question. I started off in visual arts, and even in this upcoming show, you'll see a little bit of that. I've been helping with some of the props for this show because I have a visual arts production kind of background, particularly with puppetry and mask making.
Oh,
That
very
started in
cool.
high school, and that was my job in high school was teaching and being a teacher assistant for after school programming for kids, doing puppetry and masks, as well as learning from folks. I'm originally from Providence, Rhode Island,
Okay.
and there's a really delightful, wonderful puppetry company there called the Big Nazo Puppet Factory. It's a great name. They're
It's a
giant.
great name.
They're giant puppets. They're like body size puppets. A lot of them.
Whoa.
And it's really funny because you're walking downtown Providence and it's just like normal stores, and then you get to the front of their store, and it's just like aliens, just like climbing a window and staring at you, and you're like, oh, I'm downtown Providence. But I was really lucky to have some friends and then eventually some professional connections with that company in theater. And I was in high school was just trying to figure out, do I go into college for theater, for visual arts, and having these connections with the puppetry world really kind of pushed me towards theater. So I've always liked that production side. I've often performed and I still perform because you kind of have to learn how to do a little of everything.
Sure.
But my happy place is sort of behind the scenes, creating new stories, working with actors. I love directing. I love imagining with a group of people and bringing that to life. And so it's taken different forms. I worked in a costume shop in college, and since then I've founded the House of Larva Drag Cooperative, which is my queer performance art group. Performed in the Twin Cities a lot. Uh, it takes these different forms, a lot of playwriting, a lot of that kind of thing, but also kind of experimental collaborative work, and then also producing work that's really about the nuts and bolts of how do you pay actors, how do you make sure they're doing well during a pandemic, how do you connect audience to the theater company, all these kind of big questions. I enjoy from the very imaginative side, this very kind of like rehearsal space, let's flail around in a room kind of space,
Right.
to the like very concrete, how do we make this happen in this world, in this country, with the kinds of economic and cultural constraints we have here.
It sounds like, based on at least my understanding of how the theater world works, which I get is very poor to rudimentary, but given your sort of background of a little bit here and a little bit there, it feels like you're sort of tailor made for the producing role because you have such an understanding of how all of the elements that you need to put together a show work.
Yeah, if I had to describe what I do, I would say creating theater, or creating new work, and there are different spaces that you kind of inhabit. I think that there's some careers it's really important to be a specialist, and I can see
Mm,
why that is, and there are certain specific techniques that I would even say I'm a specialist in. Some of these puppetry things I have over a decade in doing. But I think one of the things I love about theater, and especially if you're in a role that's like director, is that you're not the authority for very long. You're not
right.
the boss for very long. You play as different, the head of directing or the head of costume or these different things for the period of a specific show. And so I think that's helpful in one, keeping humble and not assuming you know everything and you're the best at something. But two, it allows you to try different things. Our stage manager for the People's Violin is also an actor, and the director is also an actor. So that happens in the theater world all the time, where we shift different roles, not just character roles, but
Right.
really in the producing of theater. And I think that's just not always available to a lot of career paths in this culture, in this country, where
Yeah.
you have to kind of do one thing or one group of things, and you don't get to play. Right now I'm doing some work with like organizing some talkback stuff, but then also how do we film shows, and then how do we do auditions. But then I'm also making a mechanical violin for this theater, for this coming production. So what, like, how do those
Right.
things normally come into place? But theater, you pool resources, you pool experiences, and you say, how can we make this happen?
So, so you mentioned the People's Violin. As we're talking, we are talking before the show opens. As you are hearing this episode, it will have opened a couple of nights ago. The beginning of the 3-week run is October 23rd. So this is going to be the first show, sort of, I don't want to say post-pandemic, so I'm not really sure we're post-pandemic yet, but it is the first time there's been a show in the Highland Community Center, the theatrical home, since 20 did I guess 2020 then, right? Since the winter show,
Mm-hmm.
or I guess the Hanukkah show of 2019 would have been the last
Yeah.
time in the theater. What sort of, is it anticipation? Is it excitement? Is it nerves about the idea of performing inside again?
I mean, I don't have a lot of the nerves, but I guess I'm not one of the performers. Uh, I think, I don't know. I think there's a lot of excitement. I think that they're broadly theater in a broad sense coming back across the state, across the country. I think there's nervousness.
Yeah.
I think what we've got going on at 6 Points is really considerate of all the safety needs of the cast, of the staff and of the audience. I mean, we're at about a third capacity for the theater each night,
Oh,
so
okay.
that we can really socially distance between groups. We've been hand picking seats so that people can, be with their pod and then also have space in between.
Right.
You need to be vaccinated, you need to be masked, all these sort of things. Cleaning after each show. We're really taking a lot of care. So I don't think there's a ton to be nervous about, frankly. Right, in the most local sense in this
Right.
in this production. I think it's hard to do that level of work sometimes, and we're trying to figure out how to make that sustainable for however long COVID will last, however long we're, Minnesota is at its level of infection rates and things like that. So there's, I
Right.
think, some nervousness about the long term, but like as far as a single production goes, I think it's really safe, and we've gotten a lot of really good feedback from audience, from folks who are like, I don't know, should I be buying a ticket right now? And then we're like, well, here's what we're doing, and they're like, oh, that's like safer than my house, that's cleaner and this kind of level of care. So I think that's really helpful. The hardest is probably finding rehearsal spaces, because it's just, we need to make sure that those kind of spaces, uh, that we can create a safe environment for the actors and for the production staff.
Well, because it sounds like it's pretty clear that the theater sort of set the bar high in terms of being in the show space and what that has to look like in terms of cleanliness, in terms of distancing. You got to make sure that wherever you end up for rehearsal sort of has similar standards
Exactly. And that's
and
just,
everything.
it's just difficult to do. I mean, we don't have our own rehearsal space. Six Points Theater, neither our office space nor the actual theater at the Highland Center. So we have to figure out, with our community connections, with all of that, where can we do that safely? And it's hard if we don't want to have, like, be in a space where lots of groups are in and out. We want to make sure that if it's a place, there aren't like kids who haven't been vaccinated, so we don't want to
Sure.
endanger them. So it's just, yeah, it's a bit, that part's hectic and a little, uh that's the biggest challenge, I would say.
Yeah. Now, is this your first show? Okay, so I know you don't have nerves as the performer, but are is there a sort is there some level of nervousness because this is the first show that you've been a part of at the theater?
I would say mostly excitement. I think it's a really good show, first of all. Like, I think
Okay.
this
That helps.
script,
That helps.
like I mean, I, not that I would expect like my first show here to be like something I totally hate, but like, it really helps that it's a show that I think is really smart and really funny and really not just funny but also like tragic in its own ways, and it just like really speaks to a lot of questions about identity, about what does it mean to be Jewish, what does it mean to be American, what's real, what's fake, how does that influence family, all these really big questions that I think are so important. And having that be the first show is wonderful. It's like I can really easily tell people, you got to see the show. It is brilliant, and OMG, you'll totally relate to this part of it or whatever. Um, the cast is amazing. I got to sit in on the first rehearsal and sort of welcome the actors. And it was just like, being around a table, no costumes, no props, very little experience of these people together. And it was fantastic. I was like, oh, I mean, how much work do you have to do? I'm sure there's a lot of work that,
I'm
but I was like, I am fully entertained. If take my money, except I mean, I work for them, but like I was like, this is entertainment in itself,
right.
really valuable.
And, and there is something so cool. I mean, and I think this was something that we got, for better or worse, to experience a lot during the pandemic, is these like TV shows or movies or plays, they come together and do these table reads very often for charity, but there is something very cool and magical to the behind the scenes of this cast who spent so much time working together and maybe are just reuniting for this one-off, to be able to have this experience of being together again and just sitting down with the pages and going through, you know, an episode or whatnot. And it's just so fun.
It's so fun. I watched the one for, I think it was Big Mouth, on Netflix, and
Yeah.
just seeing, because that's an animated show, and seeing their like actual faces being these characters, I'm like, oh my god, y'all do a lot of different voices.
Yeah.
And
And it's disarming when you see a animated show, but like the actual
yeah,
humans doing the voices. It's weird,
it's super weird.
but it's such a cool experience so that you get to see that. That's like one of your first things, is to
Yeah.
get to sit down and watch this talented group read this script. And it's really, God, that's cool.
And it's the kind of play where you have a lot of characters playing a lot of character, or a lot of actors playing a lot of different
Yeah.
characters. So even seeing how are they embodying that even just in this one reading was like phenomenal.
Yeah, and I've gotten to interview for this podcast several people who have acted at MJTC, now 6 Points, and it's just like the passion they have for it is really, it's just so fun. It's so fun to hear them be so excited about their work. And usually I'm talking to them about a particular show that's coming up, whether it's a one person show or like a whole ensemble cast. It's just so neat, and they're so into it. And it's clear that not just theater, but Jewish theater means so much to them. And to have this place to do it here, they feel, I think, pretty lucky.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. It just such an allegiance to the theater company, but born out of the joy of being there, like born
Yeah.
out of this real sense of we are asking important questions for the culture broadly and rooting it in this particular cultural experience. And that's just fantastic to be able to speak broadly and still have a kind of core connection.
Yeah. So one of the things you did mention, and I was going to ask you about anyway, but you did bring it up earlier, is that you're the co-founder of the House of Larva Drag Cooperative. What is House of Larva Drag Cooperative, and how did it come about?
That's a great question. Who knows? No, I should.
Hopefully you do. Otherwise, that's
True.
going to be the end of the answer.
Yeah, it's just words that I throw out. No. It started with my friend Guadalupe Angeles at Beloit College, where I went in undergrad. And since moving to the Twin Cities, I've worked with another alum who's sort of become the next major performer, McKay Bram, who's a dancer in Rochester, Minnesota.
Okay.
And we've done 2 full shows together and just a ton of acts that have been with Patrick's Cabaret and 20% Theater and Pangea Theater and just a whole bunch of different kind of cabarets across the Twin Cities. And it's a queer performance art group. We say drag, and we do lip sync to music. We do some of the things that are part of traditional drag shows. We did have one show that just began with my friend Peta or Guadalupe just yelling, "We're not RuPaul, we're not RuPaul." So people got that message. And I have no qualms with RuPaul personally. It's a different.
How can you? I mean,
exactly. But different kind of drag, different situation.
Yes.
Yeah, we do a lot of it's a lot of satire. It's a lot of I describe myself as drag ogress. I don't shave. I'm just like hairy and loud and just like very much embodying sort of certain stereotypes and certain kind of fears around sexuality, around gender, and just embracing that kind of space instead of saying no, we're like perfect and good and like we're totally not a threat to normative patriarchal society. We're saying maybe we are a threat to some of the ways things have been, and that's okay. And yeah, it's been a delight. We have some pretty devout fans now in the Twin Cities, which is really funny. A lot of our acts kind of reference they're you can totally enjoy them if you've never seen any of our stuff before, but a lot of them reference each other, and so then there's always like one or two people who we don't know who are in the audience who are like, ah, I get that. I'm like, great, good for you. Like, so exciting. I'm so tired of dancing, but yeah, it's a really fun group. It's yeah, so it's the three of us, and it's a way also to just filter like things in the news that suck, and like it's a way to, when there's like anti-trans health bills, or when Brett Kavanaugh is brought to the Supreme Court. There are different examples that people in our community had a lot of anger or frustration around, and we would use House of Larva as a way to kind of poke fun at that. That said, our humor is really dark and it's very inspired by like horror and like things like that. So it's not, again, it's not RuPaul. It is definitely a space to take grief or rage or anger and hopefully create something funny and communal and maybe cathartic with that. But the rage and the grief is definitely part of it.
I mean, it's great that you've created this outlet to be able to sort of channel that, that rage and that anger. And I mean, there's a lot of it out there, and for good reason. So to have that place to go is, I would think helpful and healthy.
Yeah, and we invite, I mean, especially for our full length shows, which we've only done a few in Minnesota, but these kind of shows where we bring in, we kind of MC them, and then we also bring in guest artists, and we might have like a loose narrative between our acts, but loose definitely. But it's this space where we invite the audience to interact and to release kind of what they're holding to dance, scream, yell, laugh, do these things together, and so that we're not holding these kind of emotions, these worries, these anxieties, these fears just inside and getting tenser and angrier. And so hopefully there is that communal side to it where we all need this release. We need to be able to do this in a way that is not going to harm other people. And I see a deep connection between House of Larva in that space and just like Jewish ritual, things like lamentation, having like Yom Kippur, some of these holidays, some of these rituals where we do confess sins or talk about our grief or things publicly as a way to not have to hold it. So the Jewish stuff definitely comes through in the drag stuff.
Interesting. Never would have thought of a drag show as a outlet for Jewish angst, but but there it is.
Well,
well, that is, I think it's really interesting. It's an interesting way to connect. That's one of the cool things about getting to talk to people for the show, is that everybody has their own connections to Judaism and their practice of Judaism, and that you found it through this artistic outlet is, I think, fascinating and important.
Yeah, I think it's just, I mean, there's such a strong history of Jewish theater in this country and globally, and just that is so, I mean, this is in the article that came out when I was recently hired, the press release, but like my grandparents met in the Jewish theater. That's how, in the Yiddish theater in New York. That's sort of how they met and began their family on my mom's side. And there's just a lot of theater people in my family, and I can see how well the medium of theater, the art form of theater, helps mediate life, helps us understand life, helps us get through life, helps us analyze it in this sort of headspace, and helps us feel it in this sort of heart space. And so I think it makes sense that Jewish culture, Jewish history, which has had some struggles, some challenges, a few.
You don't say.
For the last several thousand years, that it makes so much sense to me that theater is such a Jewish art form in that way, that there is a history of Jewish theaters, that there is a history of Jewish comedy, some of which is also very dark, very much laughing at things that hurt, things that maybe we shouldn't laugh at. And so I really appreciate that rich history, and I can't imagine doing the art I do either with 6 Points or individually without that history of Jewish theater.
Well, Max, as long as we are on the sort of Jewish track, I'll end the way we always end these final 2 questions. First of all, what is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Oh, I always say this is my favorite holiday whenever the holiday comes up. It's probably a tie between Sukkot, which just finished, and this is the first year I've lived in a place where I could build a sukkah.
Oh, fun.
For like 10 years, so that was wonderful. And then Tu B'Shvat, the New Year for the trees, and I very much grew up in like a hippy-dippy Jewish community service, and like very much home-centered rituals about nature and all that stuff, and I might make fun of it all the time, but I deeply appreciate it and love it also. And yeah, I don't know, I think that having a New Year for the trees is a really healthy and important thing to do, and I wish that the rest of, I don't know, secular society or whatever could do that, could spend more time. Like Arbor Day is not really celebrated, you don't do anything. No. But I, do a Tu B'Shvat Seder with a lot of my community members, some Jewish, a lot of non-Jewish people. It's very artful, and we go through a ritual, and it's just a beautiful ceremony where we talk about where our food comes from, what our connection to land is, and I think that kind of mindfulness is wonderful and should be part of a broader societal movement.
Oh, agree. But that's a great tradition, though, that you do for Tu B'Shvat. And lastly, what is your favorite Jewish food?
Oh my god. Probably babka.
Okay.
Like I really like cinnamon babka. I like chocolate everything except something about babka. I just like that gooey cinnamon sugar realness. Yeah.
Agree. It is awesome. Well, Max, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate getting to meet you and break a leg with your first show and this next show in the 6 Points Theater season, the People's Violin. If you go to tcjewfolk.com/events, all of the information for the run is on the community calendar, so check it out. And thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jewfolk Podcast Network, a product of Jewfolk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.